All right. Good morning, everyone, once again, and thank you for joining this meeting. My name is Alice Adidayo, and I'll be your moderator for today. Once again, welcome to today's webinar series. This is one of the first sessions of the webinar series on energy transition, and today we'll be talking about data evidence and energy transition, building the advocacy case. This session is actually part of budget's commitment to equipping civil society organizations, researchers, journalists, and citizens with tools and evidence they need to engage meaningfully with energy transition and also to hold the government accountable. So this conversation is very rich. We have our facilitator for today, Edidiong, who is a policy analyst and advocates working at the intersection between fiscal justice, natural resource, and ecological rights. So before we get started, I'll call on the lead of Natural Resource and Climate Governance at Budget Foundation in person of NAB Opaoluwa to set the stage, and then we move into the conversation. And on your screen, you can see some ground rules. The session is supposed to hold from 11 a.m. to 1. And then please do make sure your mic is muted, and please feel free to drop any message in the chat box and we'll do well to pick it up and respond to it. Thank you everyone once again for joining, and over to you, Mr. Enebi, for setting the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, we can.
Thank you very much. Once again, I want to appreciate everyone for thank everyone for joining us today. This is a series of a four-part series of webinars that we have developed to handle or to address specific issues around Nigeria's energy transition journey. This is also part of our stream of work that has been supported by the Resource Justice Network to what we call energy sustainability, to look for sustainable and long-lasting solutions and pathways that Nigeria could adopt when it comes to our transition journey. And the topic today is quite useful, and I think it sits at the center of some of the challenges that Africa as a continent, and not just Nigeria, has: data and the energy transition. A lot of times when we have global climate change conversations, we see that Africa is often left out. All right, Africa is often the second consideration in all of this, largely because we need data. If you are part of those who go on the field across Nigeria and across the continent, there are certain fresh and emerging areas on the continent and on several issues, whether it is solar energy, renewable energy, if it's clean cooking. There are several issues, contextual issues that require accurate data that is missing. And this is very, very instrumental to making the right decisions. And not just that, when you're looking at transferring from oil and gas to clean energy, what level of transition should we take? What path should we go through? What are the implications in the near term, medium term, and long term? How do this affect socioeconomic well-being? How will it affect macroeconomic indices? How will it affect jobs and employment? What would the implications on the economy, both in micro and macro? So these are several issues that need to be teased. That I don't think we can address everything in 2 hours, but I am very confident that our facilitator today will be able to handle some of the nitty-gritty, the unique issues around data evidence and the energy transition. Once again, let me thank you all for joining us. I really value your time for being part of this session today. And I will hand over back to Alice so she can introduce our facilitator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Enebi. You all agree with me that Nigeria's energy transition is no longer a distance conversation. It is happening right now. We can see it in budget documents, investment decisions happening globally, regulatory reforms, and also in communities that we live in, and we can see that we are all directly affected. So to lead us in this conversation today, we have a practitioner who brings both analytical depth and frontline policy experience to tackle this topic. Edidiong leads the Energy Extractives and Climate Justice Program at Policy Alert, a non-profit organization focused on physical and ecological justice in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, where he has worked for over 4 years. He also coordinates Policy Alert's work on forest and land governance. With a background in economics and deep grounding in one of the world's most consequential resource-dependent regions, Edidiong brings both analytical rigor and frontline policy experience to questions of extractive governance, energy transition, and community rights. His work engages the political economy of oil and gas, climate justice, and the governance of forest and land, which are some of the most pressing issues affecting us today. Please, with your emojis, let's welcome Edidiong Dickson. Thank you very much. Over to you, Edidiong.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you, everyone in the meeting room. I'm happy to be here. And thank you for that intro as well, Enebi. I believe you can hear me, Alice.
Yes, please, we can.
All right.
Thank
Data, evidence, and energy transition building the advocacy case. So when I got this brief, my understanding was that if we were to go on the advocacy journey, that I would try not to bore us with too much data, even though that's what the presentation is centered around. But what can we make of the data? How can we engage it, and how can we take it forward as civil society partners or media partners or just advocates for those of us who are working solo without being associated with organizations? So I'll start off this slide with, I want us to be provoked a little, and that's the slide on the Nigeria's energy paradox. And I'm coming from a different perspective when it comes to energy paradox. So energy paradox, the conventional way would be that we have an abundance of it, yet we have very limited energy for use in our homes and all of that. But while that is true, I want us to look at this from another perspective. Because of that abundant energy, Nigeria sits among the top 15 countries globally at the highest rates of ISDS. So ISDS means investor state dispute settlement, and it is a mechanism that is embedded into bilateral investment treaties. So when a country signs treaties, or when countries sign treaties among themselves, so that they can trade, companies from country A can go to country B to do business and vice versa. It is believed that there could be issues associated with that investment. So what is currently in play now is that bilateral investment treaties comes with a mechanism, investor state dispute settlement, meaning that if investors have issues in Nigeria, they can go to private tribunals abroad and sue Nigeria. And these are not normal courts. They are tribunals that have extensive powers and can find countries, and the investors can make claims against sovereign entities. And to refresh your memories, if we heard of the P&ID case some years ago, That was an example of an ISDS mechanism that was triggered. There are active claims that are ongoing against Nigeria. So we are at the highest risks of these ISDS claims over fossil fuel assets, meaning that the same investment architecture that Nigeria depends on to run its economy, this our oil economy, that is the same architecture that could be used to penalize us if tomorrow we say, oh, we are transiting now. The companies that are bringing all these billions of dollars to invest in our fossil fuel architecture, they can now say, no, this is against some of the clauses in our treaties, and I'm going to sue you in a private tribunal. So that's the paradox. The same thing that gives you advantage can be the same thing that does not allow you to move ahead from that thing. Let's ponder on that, and we'll come back to this a little bit later. Now, the conversation is about the energy transition. Why does the energy transition matter? And most times you hear people coming from the angle that the energy transition is mostly triggered by climate change. We cannot continue to burn fossil fuels like crude oil, like gas, like coal. And because of the emission profile of these sources of energy, that we have to look for others. But that's only part of the story. The other part is this, that you cannot depend entirely on fossil fuel sources to provide energy for the country at large. That would mean that for you to really tackle energy poverty, that you need renewable energy as part of your energy mix. So that is why you have countries who have fossil fuel sources also invest heavily in renewables. So that is because the conversation around transition itself should begin with energy poverty, economic diversification. This is very clear. We are a monoproduct economy. We are only known for crude oil largely, and it accounts for about 90% of government revenue. And that is not good, because if anything happens to the source of forex for your country that is 90%, it means that your capacity for the government to take care of itself, to run itself, is significantly or almost altered. Therefore, you need other sources of income or revenue to run your economy, and that's the economic diversification. And it is also closely related to the fiscal sustainability part of it. The Iran war caused oil to go up to 120, I think $130 at some point. For oil producing countries, that was a windfall. So people can look at that as an advantage. But let's take our minds to 2020, what happened? We had sea tankers, oil tankers on sea, and COVID struck. Countries refused to take delivery of those cargoes. And what did that mean? That we did not have money to run the economy. So fiscal sustainability will mean that we have to account for the period where demand for oil and gas is low. And a pandemic like COVID-19 could cause that demand to stall and reduce, or the energy transition itself, where people have little use for fossil fuels, can also cause demand to drop. And what would that mean for your budget, for government revenue? That will not be sustainable for you. Then we need to develop as a people. We are still back in key energy indicators, or development indicators rather. So the energy transition provides an opportunity for us to score points on these key development metrics. And lastly, climate resilience. It is also good that transiting or investing in newer or renewable energy could help you in your fight in entrenching climate resilience for our country. Is that the energy transition does not begin and end with climate change. Climate change is only one of many reasons, and development, as I've iterated, is the bigger reason. Now, we know what the energy transition should achieve. And the point of this capacity building is, as advocates, are we able to interrogate what that achievement, when we picture the energy transition in our mind, that achievement, are there gaps? What gaps are there on our way to transiting to a cleaner form of energy systems, or a cleaner energy systems? Next slide. Good. So, Nigeria in 2021, under the last administration, specifically the Office of the Vice President, developed Nigeria's energy transition plan. Because we realized at the time that this is something that is inevitable. As technology advances and as we continue to see the effects of fossil fuel consumption and production on our climate, that we'll need to move away from this dirty fuel. And Nigeria is a thought leader on a lot of fronts. And on this, we're one of the early movers in developing an energy transition plan. And what does that plan seek to do? It identifies two simultaneous crises, and that is energy poverty. So it is a paradox that we have so much energy that the world comes here to buy gas, to power Europe, to power Asia, and all of those places. And a lot of us do not get to see more than 5 hours of electricity in a day. And in some rural areas, there are still communities that are not linked to the national grid. And part of the energy transition plan identifies that energy poverty as something that must be addressed, and also climate change. So it has to be addressed together, and the transition plan, in addition to doing that, aims to provide universal modern energy access through renewables, lifts 100 million people out of poverty in the process of doing that, create new jobs. I think according to the plan, the target is to create about 850,000 new jobs, and also to manage long-term oil sector decline. This last point is very important, because if you are a monoproduct economy and oil and gas account for about 90% of your foreign exchange, you should be worried about the energy transition, especially considering the fact that it is about 50 years ago that Nigeria first hit 2 million barrels of oil a day. We first produced 2 million barrels of oil as at 1973. And in 2026, we are hovering around 1.5 to 1.6. We were not 200 million people in 1973, but we are now 200 million people, and we are still depending largely on oil and gas to do everything. So you're already seeing that we are not reaping the gains of the sector as we used to do. It has declined. So how do you manage that decline in the long term? Next slide. Now to go into the energy crisis deeper, let's look at some data, because this is a data conversation. Electricity access in Nigeria rose to 70% in 2023. And in 2013, it was about 50%. So that's, we've added 20% more. But despite what appears to be that gain, rural access remains at 40%, and compared to nearly 95% in urban areas. So it means that large swathes of the country do not have access to electricity. And in this modern age, we can only imagine what life would be like without electricity, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of modern living, in terms of its benefit to businesses and all of that. Also, Nigeria's installed electricity capacity increased to 14,000 gigawatts in 2024. But in the first half of 2024, the average daily available capacity was only 4.14 gigawatts. So we are used to this number in megawatts. So we are at 4,000 megawatts of electricity. And that is even down from about 4,500 megawatts in 2023. And what is the cause of this? Gas shortages, aging infrastructure, and electricity vandalism. And for gas shortages, we are feeling the effect because as at this moment, Nigeria depends on gas-powered plants for about 77% of electricity generation, with some experiencing availability factors as low as 5% due to limited gas supply. So if we've been following the news, it got really bad about last month or last 2 months that the presidency had to intervene. Most of the producers were not supplying power to the power plants anymore, and the president had to intervene. Money had to change hands. We had to pay some of these companies so that they can continue to send gas to some of these plants. It was that bad, and we had really bad shortages in many urban and rural areas. Now, another data point, households and businesses spend nearly $22 billion annually on fuel for generators, a figure that is both staggering and advocacy ready. So that is the price of all these generators we are buying and using in our offices, in our homes, is $22 billion annually. And for comparison, $22 billion is about the amount of foreign remittances that comes to Nigeria. So the money that relatives and some people who work abroad, remote workers, what they send home, hovers around 21, 22 billion. And correspondingly, that is the same amount of money that we are using to power generators for our homes and offices. We should have wrap our minds around that. That's a lot. That's a lot of money. Now, lastly, licensing data shows a pivot away from on-grid generation to captive and mini-grid systems, especially post-2020. Now, what this is simply saying is, the fact that you see people using more solar is good, though. It's encouraged. You get to use a cleaner form of energy, and you help the environment. You get to have some level of independence at that level. But every time you see someone installing solar or most of these mini grids too, there is something that it is pointing to. Do you know what that is? That people are losing faith in our national grid. That is also what that means. Because even though we know that in other developed clients, people still use solar for electricity generation. But the reason that they do that is not for the same that we are doing. Ours is mostly triggered by the fact that we don't have electricity in our homes. And they don't see the companies, the distribution companies, and even the government having the long-term capacity to deliver on that score. So what do people do? They resort to buying solar panels for their homes and offices. So while it is good on the one hand, it is a commentary on the state of our national grid. On the issue of climate change and Nigeria's emission, we are both a victim and a contributor. In what ways are we victims? Climate change has caused severe flooding in Nigeria. It has caused coastal erosion. Up north, we are dealing with desertification as a country, heat stress, agricultural losses. Climate change has caused once fertile farmlands to be lost. They have become deserts in part of the north. As we are speaking, the reality is that some of the lands that people are using for agriculture in the north today, they will not be able to use it next year by this time, because the reality is that that same spot you planted your seed and you reaped this year, by the time you go back next year, that spot, likely in some parts of the country, would become a desert. That's the reality. So we are a victim because we are dealing with that. But we are also a small contributor, but it's not also okay to say that we are a small contributor like that, because we have to paint the picture in a very nuanced way. If you look at how we are also contributing to the to the climate change, we look at one data point, and that's gas flaring. Gas flaring leads to greenhouse gas emission. either methane in cases of incomplete flaring, or where the flaring is efficient, CO2. Both are greenhouse gases because they cause the temperature of the earth to warm. An analysis of flaring volume between 2022 or 2002 to 2024 shows cumulative flaring emissions of 714.62 million tons equivalent of CO2. And in terms of revenue losses, that is about 56.7 billion US dollars. In 2015, Nigeria flared more than 23 billion cubic meters of gas, and that represents 13% of global flare volumes. This is really, really significant because it means that we are in terrible company, that is in companies that are producing. Now, after divestment, mostly one of Nigeria's major onshore stakeholders was Shell, and Shell sold its asset in Nigeria. Most of those assets have seen flaring rise dramatically in the fields that were once owned by Shell. In some cases, like in the Oyibo field in 2014 or 2024, there was flaring of gas 15 times more than what it was compared to 2020. So while at scale, we are a mini contributor to the climate crisis. These are significant numbers in themselves, and meaning that we are actually also contributing to it. And these are all things that makes the energy transition to be really imperative. Let's look at a couple of other data sets, and we'll try to wrap this up. We'll try to weave all of this together later on. Now, I've mentioned that 90% of our foreign exchange comes from crude oil. What that means is that we are exposed to revenue volatility. When there is a slump in oil prices, like for instance, at the peak of the Iran war, it was over $100. But now we are seeing that as America and Iran are getting closer to a deal, it is also coming down. I think it is about at $80 now, and it will further reduce. So while it reduces, we've seen Dangote this morning or yesterday adjusting the price because it has come down. But what it does mean for us is that if it comes down further down, that means less money for government. And the other thing is, as you continue to invest in oil and gas in the context of the energy transition, it means that you will have stranded assets. Most of these assets are not usually used for anything other than the oil and gas industry. So in a transition scenario now, we will have less need for them. And that will mean that the asset that is worth billions of dollars now or billions of naira, that those assets will have no use and become stranded. So you just have pipelines that will be buried on the ground where gas or oil will no longer flow through. They have no use, they become stranded. We also have the Dutch disease. This is one of the causes of the energy of oil dependency. Nigeria used to do so well. Nigeria used to do so well with cocoa, with groundnut, with oil palm in the east and the southeast. And all of these were revenue movers. We use this to drive development significantly. But we abandoned all of these things when oil came, because oil money was cheap, came easy, it was heavy. And we just felt that we could not continue to put that much energy into cocoa farming, into groundnut, and into oil palm plantations and processing and all of that. But that means that we have abandoned critical aspects of our economy and focus on just one. Now, what happens when that one that we have concentrated energy on is no longer there? That's a food for thought. And that's what the Dutch disease means. And that's the disease we are suffering from. And that is why countries like Norway do not want to suffer from it, even though they have oil and are benefiting mainly from their oil assets in the North Sea. They have continued to maintain productive parts of the economy. they touch only little of that oil revenue and invest the rest because they know what oil does to an economy when you depend on it. So they are running away from it. And in that way, they are a model nation. Now, the first thought I shared earlier about ISD claims, Nigeria and Egypt are at the highest risks of these claims among lower middle income countries, with investment treaties protecting significant volumes of fossil fuel assets whose continued operation would be incompatible with net zero pathways. Nigeria has an energy transition plan, and what that means is that you intend to move away from oil and gas. And every day we keep hearing that Shell has brought $5 billion to invest in Bonga North. They will bring another $20 billion to invest in Bonga Southwest. That ExxonMobil will commit $10 billion to the Owowo oil field. And that Eni is going to commit money to oil production. Now, those are contradictions. Because those investors bringing in this money want those investments to be protected to the point where they recoup their $20 billion, $5 billion and make profit on top. Now, those investments are not compatible with your net zero pathway where you're saying you are moving away from fossil fuel because those investments are fossil fuel investments. So we see the risks that we are exposing ourselves to. And if tomorrow we want to critically implement our energy transition plan and say, let's see critical action moving in the right direction, these people bringing in this 10, 5, $20 billion in will sue us at these tribunals that is basically the investor-state dispute settlement dispute that are tied to bilateral investment treaties. So you see the fiscal risk that comes with that. And they can slam you with a fine or a claim that can wipe away your entire budget for a year. That's a major risk. So we are facing a double bind that we cannot easily wind down fossil fuel because these assets, all this money that they're bringing, they're going to make sure that they are protected by these bilateral investment treaties. Otherwise, they know that they are at risk of losing their investment. Next slide. The other point that we have to consider is the effect on subsidies and public financing. So this is a question that we should ask ourselves. How much money is spent to support fossil fuel infrastructure? Like for instance, if you look at the Executive Order 9, one of the reasons why the president said he did that was because he felt that the gas flare penalty was used to fund the midstream and downstream gas infrastructure fund. And it was done in a way that did not follow the normal procurement procedure. And he felt that putting the gas flare penalty as the revenue stream of government would somehow make the midstream and gas infrastructure fund to be subjected to the normal procurement laws of the country. While all of us in this room, I know, are opposed to that executive order because we believe that gas flare penalty should go to helping communities because that's what the law says, that it should be used for the remediation and relief of those communities. It means that we're already committing more money because midstream and gas infrastructure fund is still fossil fuel infrastructure. How much of our money now that we should use to do for other development priorities are we still tying to entrenching fossil fuels in the country? And the midstream and gas infrastructure fund is just one example. How much support does renewable energy receive from our national budget? So we have the Renewable Energy Agency that are doing a couple of commendable things across some communities, rural communities, and even university campuses across the country. But at scale, it feels that what they are doing is still minute. And we need to spend more money in that area to link people to electricity access. How much money is spent on transmission? How much is spent on gas infrastructure? And ultimately, who benefits from energy spending? So we are civil society actors in the room. These are questions that can form the basis of advocacy. So this is much like an assignment task for everybody. You can take any one of them and start your research there. How much of our budget revenue or our present revenue goes to supporting fossil fuel infrastructure? You take up that research, bring out the data, generate the evidence, engage decision makers. How much are we doing in terms of renewable? You follow the same process. It's a question now. And you'll be the one asking the question, doing the research to bring out the data, and the data would serve as the evidence to your advocacy pathway. Next slide. The global energy transition dynamics. This is worth pointing out again. This is another critical data point. We have people who are climate deniers, who say that oil will still be relevant in the next 50 years. But what this slide is hoping to achieve is that whether we like it or not, that the world is already moving away from fossil fuel. And it is better we try to catch up with them, even though we advocate for a just transition, which is part of a couple of the next slides. But we should not be denying, because there's a global dynamic already that people are moving away, and we should be observant of this trend. And some of it is that a lot of countries, especially because of the AI race, are significantly investing in renewable energy. So we see what China is doing, we see what America is doing, we see what the European Union is doing in this regard. So we should be observing what other people are doing. The net zero commitment, just like we've said 2060 for Nigeria, other countries have set very ambitious targets. Some have said there will be net zero in 2035, 2040, 2050, and ours is 2060. But if you look at that, it means that some countries have set dates that are closer to where we are now than ours. Then if you look at investor preferences, there are investors now that are conscious of their commitment and their obligation to the climate. They are interested where their money is going. So if they discover that their money is going to fund fossil fuel projects that will ultimately hurt the planet and worsen things on the climate change front, some of these people have sleepless nights and therefore do not want their money to go in that direction. And what this means is that you have less capital available for this kind of project. And even the ones that are available to certain countries in the Middle East and in the global North. So we're having problems attracting investment. Countries in the global South are having that problem, like Nigeria. Because the capital now is squeezed. And because it's squeezed, you have a lot of people going after something that is limited. So that's another thing that you have to account for, that people, investors in this case, are not really interested in committing their money to that kind of investment anymore. Then there are trade implications. So there are lots of mechanisms that are coming, that are now already in effect in the EU, that there are certain imports that you bring to Europe that will be adjusted for carbon pricing at the border. And that would mean that if you were not careful of your emission footprint when you were producing some of these items, when you export them to Europe, they stand a chance of facing higher tariffs. And higher tariffs would mean that those products are no longer competitive price-wise. So you see, people who have tried to minimize their own the footprint of their export would have an advantage over you that did not do anything to minimize that. And there is a particular place we need to really feel this, and that's in our oil and gas. So there are some EU regulations that will come into effect in maybe next year already. What that would mean is that this same mechanism would apply. So yes, they can accept fossil fuel imports, but they will also attach this kind of higher tariffs to products that come from countries with higher emission footprint. And we've already showed that Nigeria, as at 2023, accounted for about 13% of gas flaring, meaning that the oil we produce has a very high emission footprint already. Now, we are depending on Europe for about 40% of our export, about 40 to 60% of the export of our LNG. And if that kind of market suddenly slams you with this kind of tariffs because of your emission footprint, it means that you are no longer competitive. So this is even before the energy transition. These are already global dynamics that you have to account for and take action in the near term for. These are critical data points that we need to look at and account for. Next slide. Now, I want us to look at some of the policy contradictions that we have in place. We have about 4 of them. Number 1, Nigeria has committed to net zero by 2060, yet simultaneously promotes new oil fields, new gas projects, expanded fossil fuel infrastructure. We hear people at the regulators say that Nigeria considers itself a gas nation now. So they want to utilize the last gas deposit that we have in the country. But we have already committed to net zero. Why are we committing to those new infrastructure and new projects? That's contradiction 1, which we need to ponder on. Contradiction 2, the government is also promoting renewable energy. I've mentioned what the Renewable Energy Agency is doing in some rural communities and even university campus to expand access. Yet, our energy transition plan considers gas as a transition fuel. Well, while it may be called a transition fuel, we must still know that gas is still fossil fuel. It does not mean that gas is clean, because there is this misconception around with a lot of people that gas is clean energy. That's not the case. Gas is fossil fuel, and you cannot be talking about a cleaner form of energy and promoting a dirty source of fuel at the same time. Now, you may do that in the near term, where you are trying to expand electricity access, but in the long term, it should be more of renewable and less of the dirty one. So how are you promoting these 2 things simultaneously? That's a contradiction. The third contradiction is we are seeking climate finance. And we are seeking climate finance because we say we are a vulnerable country in the global south. We are facing the effects of climate change that largely we did not cause. You know, the industrialized countries of the world caused the mess that we are in. So therefore, you have to allocate climate finance to us. But while you are seeking for climate finance as a vulnerable entity, you are also doing something contradictory, which is that you are seeking increased fossil fuel investment to still contribute to the problem that you're calling yourself a victim for. And nowhere is this contradiction felt like in Nigeria participating in BOGA, Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, and at the same time signing deals for Shell to come in and invest more money in offshore Nigeria. That's a contradiction. Then the last one is the ISDS and the policy space. We've made net zero commitment. We are seeking climate finance. But this bilateral investment treaty, the architecture makes us legally exposed to investor claims if we implement some of the policies that are supposed to take us, that people are supposed to take us serious for in terms of our net zero commitment. Now, the fossil fuel sector is the most contentious within this ISD system as at 2023. And investors around the world won $77 billion in compensation as at the end of 2023, and at least 249 known fossil-related ISD cases are currently being filed. That should scare us. So, our commitment politically constrained, they are also legally constrained in ways that some conversations on this subject do not account for. So if you look at most of these things now, these contradictions, let's critically reflect on it. Do we say that Nigeria is hypocritical for promoting new fossil fuel investment while committing to net zero? Or Nigeria is hypocritical while it is promoting renewable and at the same time claiming using gas as its transition fuel rather, seeking climate finance and seeking new fossil fuel investment, and entering into new investment while those investment comes under the purview of existing bilateral investment treaty. Do we call all of this hypocrisy, or hello? Do we call all this hypocrisy, or we simply say that it is because of the development pressures that we are facing as a country? That is what is making us to take this kind of double-faced posture to these issues. So is it hypocrisy or is development pressure? That's a food for thought. So let's ponder over it. And I think the time will come for us to dwell on this more. And next slide. We often hear just energy transition or just transitions. And just would simply mean justice, that it is fair. That is what it means, that the transition has to be fair. But fair to who? Now, a couple of questions to ponder on here. These communities that we have gone to, we have fouled their air, we have poisoned their waters, we have made their farmlands not to be productive. We have caused social tension between neighboring communities because they are struggling on who owns the land, that there is pipeline and all of that. What happens to those oil-dependent communities when we just leave oil and move away from oil, diversify our economy, and use renewable as our main source of energy? What happens for those communities that have paid that steep price? What would justice mean for them? In my state, Akwa Ibom, if you go to if you drive to the major export terminal called the QIT, the Akwa Ibom terminal, it is one of the largest oil export terminal in the country. So on your way there, you see young persons mounting about 2 or 3 roadblocks on the major road to the terminal. And they call themselves Labor Committee. And anytime you appear as maybe a contractor to Seplat that owns that asset now, they will tell you that you have to give youths of the community slots to work. Now, because of the architecture, the political economy of oil and gas, a lot of young persons have been primed to see only fossil fuel jobs as the only remedy in their locale, because that's the only thing they know. So we have a lot of them that are employed by these companies. In a scenario where the transition as we're talking about happens, what happens to all of those people? Those currently employed, those looking to be employed, all of the workers in the fossil fuel industry. What happens? What does justice mean for them? That's question number 2. Now, we are talking about the renewable energy now. Under the fossil fuel regime, the Nigerian state owns every mineral resource, whether it is oil and gas, gold, lithium, anything that is mineral that is found under the soil. Once it is discovered, the power of the state government ceases. The federal government takes over at that point. Although the states will be entitled to 13% of that by the constitution. But that would mean that communities do not own what is on their ground. So in the same way, when we pivot to renewable energy, as they are increasing renewable energy infrastructure, who owns it? The same question of ownership. Who owns it? And who would receive transition finance, like the climate finance that we're asking now? It is paid to the federal government, but they are supposed to use it to do something for these communities. And we discovered that the communities are not at the point that they are receiving any of this funding. How do you call that fair? And who bears the cost the most for the transition? All of these are questions that revolve deeper introspection. But that is where you come in to unlock some of the answers to this question. And if you really see points that appear very unjust, that is why you are an advocate. And I think that is why this conversation is taking place. So the next slide, why data matters. Now, this is where you come in. We've given a lot of data set, have been spread out throughout these slides. You are also aware of them in your personal work, your research, in what your different organizations do. But anytime you discover a data, that data does not have the ability to speak for itself. Data becomes advocacy when it answers questions, and such questions as who benefits, who pays, who decides, who is excluded. And now look at some areas that they can choose to do research on and generate data. Electricity access data. So you can come from the aspect of your own community, not the urban center that you are living, say in Abuja or Lagos. The village that you come from, are they linked to the national grid? How many people live in that village? And the lack of electricity access, what does it mean for people in that community? Budget data. How much is your government budgeting, either as subnational entities or the national government? How much are they budgeting for issues that we are talking about today? What does the budget say about the commitment or the seriousness of the government to some of these issues? You interrogate it, and you look at the allocation numbers in terms of what is budgeted, and you look at the budget performance report for what is even released, as against what was allocated. We have methane emission data. This is significant because this is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. It traps a lot of heat, more than carbon, 80 times more than carbon. Look at flaring data. For communities in the Niger Delta, what does the host community development trust spending reveal about their commitment to the transition? For example, Policy Alert did an index, which we launched earlier this year, that assess these trusts on their commitment to the transition. The 3% that is used to fund the trust is coming from fossil revenue. And now the trust is a major development vehicle in most of these communities. In some communities that are bigger than the local governments that they are in, this trust. Some are bigger than 2 local governments put together in some states. Now, what does their spending reveal? How are they preparing their people for the energy transition? That's something you can interrogate. Climate finance flows, energy subsidies expenditures. The government is claiming that they're spending a lot for us to even be able to see electricity because our current electricity pricing is not cost reflective. So they have to augment for us. And because of the shortfall, you recently heard that the World Bank canceled a loan facility that was supposed to be tied to the electricity value chain, because there was no pathway that the government could not show that they could actually recoup what they had already invested in the sector. So it didn't make sense to continue to pump money, especially loans, into that sector, and that facility was canceled. We saw that in the news. So you can interrogate that. What does it reveal? Then this renewable deployment statistics. We've said the Renewable Energy Agency is doing a lot in rural areas. The spread, is there an asymmetry between one part of the country as opposed to others? Is there asymmetry in one campus as against the other? What does the statistic reveal? Do most people who need this renewable energy at those who are really in need of it in some rural areas, do they have access to it? What are the gaps? These are things that is worth interrogating. And all of these data points, this useful data set, when you harvest them, they can't speak for itself. They speak to advocacy only when you are able to touch decision makers or contact decision makers. You know who has been excluded, you identify a problem, and work out a pathway because you must clearly show us a pathway to what we are doing. So let's think of something now. The next slide. This is an advocacy framework, basically. You find the data. Find the data. And you must make sure that your data is correct. How do you do that? You verify the data. So you don't just take data from any sources. And this is why you have to take data from credible, especially official sources. And that's why we mention things like the budget document. The budget is the most credible document that the government can give because it is mandated by law and you cannot do any expenditure outside what is budgeted for. So if you are trying to talk about government commitment or lack of it, one of the key places you can go to is that budget document. And the government cannot say, oh, I did not commit to it. Because if you said you committed to it, you actually budgeted for it. It shows the level of commitment. Then what happened after budgeting? So when you get such documents from those credible sources, verified its authenticity, you have to interpret that data. What story does it tell? And depending on your angle, you can interpret it in various ways. Data could be interpreted, but you must have where you are heading to. And after interpreting it, you must humanize the data. So that data, those numbers must not remain abstract after you've interpreted it. If not, you sound like a lecturer in class who is boring. You may not elicit any form of interest. So what makes people to understand that data if you humanize it? They begin to see themselves as humans into the data. Oh, this is a troubling data point. Oh, what will make someone to say this is troubling? Because they've already imagined themselves under that framework. And now, after humanizing that, you connect it to public policy. And lastly, mobilize action as advocates, either at the level of the community. Now, you could say communities suffer from poor electricity. Does that make any sense? Clearly, it doesn't. Clearly, it doesn't. But if you say, despite so billion invested in the electricity sector, community A, Y, B, X, Y, Z still receives less than 1 hour of electricity daily. And that means that a community that is mostly made of fisher folks cannot preserve their catch beyond that day. It means that there are no entrepreneurs because there is limited capacity for entrepreneurship where there is no electricity. So you could begin to tell the effects of this lack of electricity access from that data point. But the point is that you must humanize it. But if you just actively say, oh, it shows that communities suffer from poor electricity, people will not connect to it. But they will be able to connect to it if you are able to first provoke them with the amount of money that is invested in the sector, the particular community that you are talking about, and the evidence to show, like the number of hours of electricity that the community enjoys. That way you'll be able to build evidence, and when you build evidence, it is that evidence that creates pressure. So when the data came out that the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs made expenditure to go to a state that does not have airport, and she bought flight tickets, and she also did airport taxis and all of that, budgeted for a state that the only access is by road. You saw the pressure that evidence generated, because they were actually what we call receipts, like on the social media space, we call it receipts. They were receipts, to that effect. And because of that receipt, there was pressure. And what did that pressure lead to? The president had to excuse her from her role as minister. So action can also be taken in whatever our interest or wherever our interest lies, if we're able to generate this evidence to create the needed pressure. So the next two slides. Next one. Good. So the energy transition is already happening globally. We've seen some of the reasons and data that has shaped the conversations around the energy transition, both internally and externally. And there is no denying that. But the point is that in our context as Nigeria, who will shape the energy transition? Would it be citizens? Would it be the government? Would it be oil companies? Would it be communities? Would it be investors? Investors who want to make money off this present fossil fuel architecture would not want to see that architecture ever leave. Do we trust them enough to allow them to determine the energy transition process? The oil companies who are making profits, the jumbo profits, they are declaring huge profits from fossil fuels. Do we say that they are really looking forward to a time when we'll put them out of business with enthusiasm? And therefore, can we trust them to shape the energy transition for us? How about the government? Considering some of the revenue and fiscal pressures that they are facing, can we allow the energy transition entirely to the government to shape, even though they are such a critical stakeholder? Because in the face of pressure, what the government may do will be to continue to shift the goalposts or to make certain compromising or contradictory positions, take compromising or contradictory positions that will not benefit the country long term. Is it the communities who are facing the brunt of the transition, or citizens of the country generally? Who do you think should shape the energy transition? Now, the energy transition, we must understand, appears to be about energy, but that's not the case. It is a governance question. As the second or third slide has showed, that it has to do with the economic diversification. It has to do with addressing energy poverty. And all of those are governance questions. So even though the subject might appear to be technical and around energy, but it goes beyond that. It's a governance question, And the quality of Nigeria's transition will depend not only on technology, on finance, but whether citizens can use the evidence that we have to demand accountability, equity, and justice. And as it was introduced, this is a capacity building series to expose civil society actors to some of these trends, data points, how to generate evidence, but most importantly, to engage. Advocacy is to engage the process so that we can drive accountability and meaningful outcomes. So that's about it. And I think that we may have a couple of questions or remarks to make. Alice, how does this work?
All right. Thank you very much, Edidiong, for that very rich conversation. We do appreciate you for building our capacity today. So it's time for questions, comments, and please feel free to also push back. So I think I'll be opening the question segment with my question, and then I'll check the chat if you have any question in the chat box, and then um, others that have indicated with a show of hand will also come next. Please, before then, the link to the attendance has been pasted in the chat. Please do well to fill that so that we can also share the presentation slide and the recording with you after this session. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so back to my question, Edidiong. For journalists and community groups that have very limited technical capacity, they are unable to read emission inventory or project finance documents. What is your most practical advice on how they can begin to engage with data? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alice. So I think it's pretty straightforward. Nobody is an island, and we're all helped to be at the point that we are. So for people in that category which you've mentioned, all they need to do is partnership with people who understand the issues, who would be able to reduce the issues from that technical perspective to that which can be understood by a non-technical audience. And that's the work of civil society. And I think that's the work that organizations like Budget do, like Policy Alert is doing. On Friday, I'll be going to a community alongside other members of my organization. The idea is that oil production has started in some onshore communities here in Akwa Ibom. And some of these communities do not understand what's happening. The issues are technical for them, and our mandate is to go and reduce it to bite sizes for their comprehension, and even share knowledge materials that are simplified so that they can understand their issues and their rights. And this community, they reached out to us to say, oh, we see the work you do, and we believe that you can help us on this journey. And that's what is happening. So in the same way, these communities or people in this category can seek out help. There are always resources available within civil society that will be able to reduce these complex issues to their understanding. And as I understand, most of these resources do not have to be procured with money. So people do not have to be scared that it's intensive in terms of they have to invest money to be able to get that. Most organizations can tie these around some of the work that they already do and still do a good job to bring communities to understand. And this is a very good question, because if you do not understand the issues well, you cannot engage. And so communities must be helped to see the issues from that lens where they are troubled enough to want to engage the process and see action in the right direction. So I think collaboration, then the willingness by civil society partners and other advocates to avail themselves to these communities of persons to reduce these technical issues in a format that can be understood by a non-technical audience.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Edidiong, once again for that. We have three hands raised so far, so I'll call on Hero Links Global Tech. Please introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and then your question. Thank you.
Hello.
Please go ahead, we can hear you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir. Thanks for this beautiful presentation, sir. We sincerely appreciate this, sir. I have a few questions, sir. For some of us who already doing our capacity, who also is into this renewable energy advocacy, somebody like me personally, I'm a media person, a trained media presenter from the National Broadcast Academy. I chose to be advocating for renewable energy in Nigeria too. But the issue we are currently having, sir, is this. Most of us have the zeal, but the platform to be used is quietly expensive. Somebody like me personally, I paid for my radio program weekly. Is there any assistance which maybe we can get to be able to continue on this advocacy? That is number one. Number two, is there available data that which can be given to us or um, assisted, with our programs so that we can continue enlightening the community? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I understand that financial constraints is some of the things, it's a typical thing which we get to deal with in civil society. But I think there are remedies to that. There are remedies to that. You can still get a time when we are able to frame this issue as a public interest issue. Yes, it may not be as regular as we desire. We may be able to get radio time. Then you can also be innovative. I understand that the radio is your forte, media, but you also have the social media too, that there is really no barrier to entry. So it calls for innovation. You can pen your thoughts down. I'm sure that many newsroom editors will be able to give you spaces on their newspaper columns or their newspapers to carry on some of the advocacy. So my point is that while you may have identified that as an effective avenue where you can carry out your advocacy, you may need to broaden the scope and be innovative of other ways. Then there is this other part. You have to be visible to a lot of civil society partners too, because some of them have radio programs, and most times they have to match a particular topic to the skill set of the contributor at the point. And it's usually difficult to get people to get on this program sometimes. That's why it appears that you see only a few people talking about the issues, that repetition, because those few people are the ones they trust to do a good job. So if you are visible enough, and what will help you to be visible to some of these actors, these CSO actors now, would be if you are able to spread your tentacle and attract visibility. They can get you to some of these radio programs and other media events where it still counts for you that you are contributing in that way. So I think innovation and partnership broadly, that's what I'm trying to talk about. Then the other part is data is, you have to mine it. And this is why it is a difficult thing for a lot of people. So take your mind back to maybe your university days. A lot of people did projects that they just used secondary data, something that someone else had already done. They did literature review, just did those secondary data and did their project, graduated. Because data is actually a technical thing. So they didn't want to launch the surveys and all those other tools to get primary data, interpret it, account for margin of error, all those statistical imputation and all of that. So they just use secondary data that has already been triangulated for their work. But in the case that you're asking, I think you have to mine the data. Budget documents, as I mentioned, is one place that you have to go to get data set. You can also go to the Renewable Energy Agency, social media accounts, their website to see what they are doing. They have some of their reports there. And as I said earlier, from what they publish about their work, you can even tell a story. Are they more concentrated in the north than in the south? Is there a preference for a particular part of the country than the other? That could be your own angle, that every part of the country needs this problem. But from what they are publishing, this is what it appears to tell. And it may be that you may be the only person as at this time. So the be more alive to it and be ready to do the hard work. I understand that data mining and analysis is a lot of work, but it's very fulfilling if you get to know how to do it and also how to utilize it. So I think that's what I can say for the two issues you've raised.
All right, Mr. Edidiong, thank you very much for that summation. Collaboration is key. So I'll move on to the next person, Ubong, Mr. or Mrs. I'm not sure. Ubong, please kindly unmute your mic and ask the question. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So this Mr. Obong from Hood in Akwa Ibom. So, Mr. Edidiong, I'm concerned about how do we strike a balance between a valid need of generating revenue as opposed to ending utilizing fossil fuel. So if we want to talk about gas elimination plan and all of that, there's a genuine need that the government also needs this revenue for economic development. So at what point do we strike a balance between cutting revenue source from government and amplifying the need of climate change and renewable energy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ubong. I think it's a good point that you've raised, that we have to strike a balance, and that goes to the justice angle of it. So the just transition would mean that Nigeria and other global south countries who do not contribute to this crisis as much would not have to transit like America and Europe that are mostly responsible for where we are in because of what it took them to be industrialized countries. So that justice angle is accounted for. And that is why you see that countries like Britain are already taking what will appear to be very drastic measures around fossil fuels, and to the chagrin of some of their citizens. But while they're already doing that, setting ambitious target, even when they're facing revenue pressure, they have allowed countries like us to set dates like 2060, which is a bit farther away from theirs, because they understand that we cannot do that at the same time. But this is where the balance has to come in. Every child is not the same, like we've already established. But you must see some markers of progress for every child. So the only difference is that those markers, the progress may not come at the same time for child A, B, and C. But at every point in time, after some time, you should be able to see that child A has moved from point 1 to point B. Now, from 2021 August, when the Vice President then, Yemi Osinbajo, launched the Energy Transition Plan. So the question would be, if we are serious and committed to some of the things that are contained in that plan, what meaningful action 5 years in have we taken in that direction? So even 5 years, we've not done anything substantial. You've seen now that, the initial years was that a new government came into place and all of that. But that new government is about to go to seek the renewal of its mandate next year, meaning that they are doing close to 4 years already, in addition to what was. So are we seeing any progress? So we seem to be fixated on entrenching the current fossil fuel domain where things remain as they are. We are even saying that we want to be a 3 million barrels a day country to generate oil production to that. All of that will come at a cost to communities, a cost to your commitment to transit. And who is paying for this cost? The poor communities, us as citizens, in terms of lower standard of living and all of that. So yes, that balance must be struck, but you must also make progress in a certain direction. And what we seem to be seeing is that Nigeria is doing progress in only one direction, which is to entrench the current architecture of the fossil fuel economy. So we should be seeing you do things simultaneously, because the justice conversation has allowed you, for instance, to say, okay, if you want to increase electricity output, we should do two things at the same time. We can both invest in renewable and fossil fuel to increase output initially, instead of saying renewable has to replace this one immediately. Then we move from that to, okay, they can no longer be the same in 10 years. Renewable has to outpace the fossil fuel. That is how your energy mix should look like. But if your energy mix, your output increases and everything is in one direction, it shows that your commitment to this other side is not serious. So I think that clearly should show where the balance should be struck, that you should move simultaneously in both ways. But the long term should be a reduction in the dirty form of energy and more in the direction of renewable.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Eddie. Just before I move to Mr. Olamide Martins, we have a comment in the chat from Mr. Razak. He said, "Thank you for the beautiful presentations and very insightful as well. It's just banding of electricity affects every common man and artisans generally. Most people do not get value for money. Also, irrational supply and indecent tariff has to be looked into." Thank you for that comment, Mr. Razak. So we can then move to Mr. Olamide Martins. Kindly unmute yourself, sir, introduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to Comrade Dixon. Thanks for that very beautiful presentation, quite engaging. I have just a couple of reflections and maybe two questions after. I think Nigeria is too large and diverse for climate and, of course, developmental dialogue to be concentrated in Abuja, Lagos, and maybe Rivers State as we currently have them. I'm worried about the capacity of subnationals and, of course, their disposition to climate governance. Many a times, if we don't get feedback or let me say signals from Abuja and maybe Lagos, it seems not to be. I'm looking at our approach as a country, towards climate issue and, of course, our disposition to just transition that Comrade Dixon, rightly cited. So, the question or the reflection for me then would be, to what extent are subnational governments currently equipped, maybe technically or financially or institutionally, to design, facilitate, or let me say, even implement just transition? There's a lot of things that we need to do here. Yes, we have a national framework, but national framework will not trickle down to my community in Ekiti State. It has to be domesticated somehow. And of course, there are a lot of technical resources, financial resources, even the strength of institution that we need to go into this. Perhaps that's why we are even stopped and nothing seems to be working. I also remember that should be last year, while we were reviewing the third edition of the National Economic Contribution, NDC 3.0. I saw how states struggled to provide data sets. And I'm talking about states that have commissioner for environment, that have director in charge of climate change, how they struggle to provide data sets that were mandatory to inform priority setting and evaluation. As at when we left the meeting, only about 18 states out of 36 were able to provide data. And we were running out of time. NDCs are being reviewed every five years. We have to outsource competence. Nigeria has to get consultants from Malaysia and the likes, and we have to rely on secondary data and opinion to inform our own priority as a country. It's a big problem, and I think Mr. Dickson has rightly mentioned it. Yes, we can do a lot as individuals, organizations, trying to pull out data, but we still have to benchmark these with the standards set by government. But this same government are not even close to providing this evidence that should be the primary source of, evidence that should inform our work. Maybe the question then will be, how can Nigeria begin to look into taking this issue seriously. I like when he mentioned that just transition is beyond climate change. It has to do with development. There is nothing, that you can connect with this. It is beyond the argument about climate change. So there's a big gap that needs to be filled. And I'm thinking perhaps we might need to make this more mandatory. Can we begin to force subnationals by way of legal intervention to make data available? As we speak right now, we don't even know how many we are in this country. How can you manage what you have failed to measure? It's practically impossible, and that's why we have to outsource competence year in year out to be able to drive our policies that could facilitate growth as we want it to be. So it's like the country, and I'm not saying we are immune against this. It's like the whole thing is messed up. And to me, I might be wrong. You can correct me. It appears to be deliberate and intentional. And then the question then I will ask is, how can Nigeria now begin to reduce our dependence on external, technical assistance, and instead maybe build domestic expertise, build subnational capacities, to be able to drive our own climate change agenda? That's the first question. And I also had Comrade Dixon, very, very emphatic on climate finance and what we should be doing. But I also think that our current climate finance architecture, we need to have this distinction between what climate finance is and what carbon finance is. And I'm saying this as somebody who have been privileged to be in some conversations where these two subjects, were extensively deliberated on. I've attended court by privilege a number of times, and I saw how people argue on this point. We can't call emission trading schemes or carbon markets as climate finance. And that's the narrative that the government is saying. It's not speaking to justice, like Comrade, rightly mentioned. Those were carbon finance. Those were finances that should keep the status quo in place, that should maintain corporate power over our natural resources, that should keep the poor, below the poverty line. They are carbon finances. They are not climate finances. So that distinction should be made, and we need to hear this clearly from government. Otherwise, we stand the risk of having them lump everything together and say, "Hey, after all, we are making investment, we are attracting investments for climate finance." No, come on. I think those were not climate finances; they were finances towards carbon expansion, that will further impoverish the people. I mean, that's my own personal opinion. Those narratives should also come out very clearly from government. Otherwise, we are at risk of whatever disposition they throw at us. So I'm also worried about the implication around our transparency issue, accountability, and of course, how we report climate-related financial flows. Like I said, we don't even have values at the moment. There are no data at the moment. We don't even know. There is no, sir. I have checked the number of times. The Nigerian Just Transition, website has been down since about 4 months now. As at now, I just checked again. The website is down. So if we can't even trace what is happening, it's all joke, really. It's all joke. And that's why you see our policies, being at the risk of foreign actors, including multilateral institutions, maybe consultancy network like we currently have them, and those we refer to as policy entrepreneurs, designing, infusing ideas, net zero, blah, 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 that speaks only to their concerns and to their interests. So I'm worried about the current framework, the role of subnationals, and also having more accountability enshrined in our policymaking processes. Maybe finally, before I stop, I would also like to know how Nigeria can strengthen, our institutional resilience, so that our climate frameworks are primarily driven by our domestic, priorities or peculiarities, while still not disengaging constructively from global climate governance systems. We can't afford to be an island, but then we have to build our internal resources, our internal capacities in manners that competence becomes natural to those who should drive these priorities. Those were my initial reflections for now. Once again, thank you so much, Comrade Dixon. I didn't expect anything less from you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lamidi. So I think these are really sound reflections, and I think it's something that I I'm also dealing with. I think in the middle of the presentation, I mentioned that some of these answers are not readily available. But it makes me, when you paint the picture this way, especially when it has to do with competence and institutional strength of subnationals especially, I had a conversation over tea with a few persons. One works with the Joint Revenue Board, JRB now, and he was going on and on the motive behind the tax bills, what they sought to achieve, what they are achieving, how they have harmonized this and all of that. No, initially I argued with him that yes, what you are saying is well intentioned, but that it makes me worry that we are not a federation, because what a federation should do is to allow these people to have wiggle room, you know. So when you have this top bottom, the federal government imposes things, tax laws, adopted stuff, that it continues to erode away at what should make us a federation that allows states some wiggle room and powers to decide certain things for themselves. And he kept making the point that it is abused. And I said, yes, that I understand that some of these states will abuse that. That's why you have certain levies and taxes that are, the price tags are outliers when compared to those of other states. But at the same time, even when I was making that argument for federalism, I understood where he came from. And I think that's the same kind of argument that may apply here, So it should be that in some way, even though it's something that I may not want to advocate for, but maybe a top-bottom approach is what will get us to see the kind of action and institutional strengthening and competence that you are saying. For instance, we see them using the same templates for budgeting and all of that, because that's decided at the level of the governors forum, who designed some of these frameworks and impose it on them and ask them to adopt it holistically. Now, so if you download the budget of many states, the updated budget for 2026, you see all of them have what is called climate tagging and nutritional tagging. So that's just something that was decided at a central level, that you should code a certain percentage of your budget for climate change and for nutrition purpose. And, so beyond that, there is really no strategy to drive it down. So that tagging that you did for climate change, what does it translate to really on the ground? It's just something that they have done to fulfill the requirement on a template. So I think the quickest way to build this competence and drive some of the things that we are hoping to achieve would be to engage entities like the Governors Forum, principally. I think the Governors Forum, they continue to remain a major clearinghouse for development issues. So instead of going about to deal with these states one after the other, I think that's a better way that they can develop a framework. If it can be developed at that stage on the issues that you're talking about, then it can be imposed on them, then monitor. That's just my thought at this point, considering that if you leave it to them for themselves to figure out, the pace at which they would take to figure that out would never be the same. And the output would also be questionable for some people, while it may be commendable for others. But I also wanted to say this. Some states really have an incentive to do certain things around the areas of this conversation because they have a lot to lose. So I think non-oil producing states already are living in a certain reality. They have less revenue coming from the federal purse. They have figured out maybe how to run their states on internal revenue. But that's a big no for most of the oil producing states. They seem to have a lot of money now, but they don't know the situation they are in. They cannot figure out where they are in the stream of time. So you have states like my state, Akwa Ibom, that depends on FAC for over 90% of its revenue. So that means about 92% of the revenue, going by the last record, comes from outside. And you are able to, what you generate internally is less about 8%. That's crazy, because it means that if something happens to that external resource, that your capacity as a state to function is completely wiped off. So Akwa Ibom, Bayelsa, Delta, Edo, River, all these oil producing states, they have an incentive more to mainstream this conversation in building fiscal resilience because everything they are doing is tied to fossil fuel revenue. And if it evaporates tomorrow, they find themselves in a worse state than some other subnational entities who have never had 13% derivation revenue. So they face a major shock in that direction. So that's just what I wanted to add, and that's why we need to engage them more, because it means that people in the Niger Delta, beyond the pain of extraction, the pollution that they're already dealing with, if they get to deal with a fiscal crisis associated with the evaporation of oil revenues now, it's a double whammy for them, a double whammy, and that makes the conversation particularly acute to have in this context.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edidiong. We are gradually coming to the end of our conversation. We have about 16 minutes to the end of this session. For all those that have submitted their questions and comments, thank you very much. The quality of this participation clearly reflects how evidence-engaged advocacy is all about, right? So we have two more questions. So I'd like Madam Lizzie to unmute her mic. Introduce yourself, please, ma'am, and then ask a question. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, all. Are you hearing me?
Yes, please, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Thank you very much. My name is Ambassador Lizzie Ibine from Nigerian Women Agro-Allied Farmers Association. We are also part of the ECOWAS Women in Agriculture and African Union. Now, on climate change, we have done it over the years. And as a farmer, as a practicing farmer, climate change means a different thing to me than to a pilot and some industries and now Niger Delta area. Now, when we are analyzing or teaching a climate change, do we factor that it means a different things to different people? Because for me, climate change is the information and monitoring of weather as it affects our food production, as it affects our movement to farm, as it affects our planning. Because if you don't plan well, it will also bring you at the end of the transaction or farming poor yield and bad business. So now each community has its own impact analysis, impact information, and experience. So how do we factor and translate this climate issue in different tones to different groups and communities? And what have we done with capturing of data on our own that we can now analyze and say that for year 2027, this should be our expectation and impact from ourselves as the civil society and leaders of the communities? This is my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Lizzie. I think in the presentation, I mentioned this, I captured these differences in what it means for people up north and what it means for people down south, even for different occupations like farming. So obviously, harsher dry season and more intense rainfall during the wet season has impact on agriculture, or even the fact that we cannot accurately predict weather patterns anymore. So it has to be a gamble in some way. You plant too early, you lose the crop. You plant too late, you lose revenue too, because maybe others who figured it out better than you would already be in the market while you are yet to harvest. So you miss that seasonal market. So The effects are not the same, and I think we have civil society partners who are working in different contexts. Like Olamide, who just spoke, his work tees off our food systems as well. So beyond the effects of external corporate interest to capture indigenous food systems, they also do a lot of advocacy around the impact of climate and the food system. So that the resources are available already to help people working in the context like yours to adapt, to gain the required knowledge and all of that that can help you to deal. So at this stage, we are talking about resilience for everybody. Resilience will mean that we are all coping. And when you are coping, what makes you not fall off the way while another person continues? That's what resilience means. But for the impact, they're already here with us. We just have to figure a way to deal with that, as the scenario changes.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Sorry, can I also react to the question raised by Madam?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
thank you. Thank you, Comrade. Yes, and Comrade Dixon was right. I don't know if Madam is aware that indigenous seeds are now being threatened by GMOs and synthetic products. And that most of the time farmers are now complaining for not being able to farm appropriately. The weather, like Comrade mentioned, is fluctuating, and things now seems to be on the, maybe supernatural side of it. And that is why stories from people who are actually on the field are very, very important. you know. And let me also add, I think I mentioned NDC. Interestingly as well, agriculture, forestry, and land use is now being incorporated or it's now becoming more prominent in the NDC. Meaning we cannot totally dissociate agriculture from the impact of climate change. So whatever it is that is changing, I'm glad that you are a farmer and you are documenting these changes. So whatever variation, either from pre-planting, during planting, or post-planting, that were aberrations. I mean, it's good to also document them and have them, benchmark against standards set by the government and existing data. Just want to add that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langide, for providing additional context. We do appreciate you for that. So we have a question in the comments section from Toye. The question is, what is the rationale behind charging researchers for public data sets while simultaneously providing no guarantee regarding the quality, completeness, or timeliness of the data being supplied? Mr. Edidiong, I'll allow you to respond to this. Thank you.
When it mean what I'm confused as to what it means by the charges. So if he's talking about maybe from official government agencies, if talking about freedom of information to get data, I think usually you bear some costs for that. Then for others, if you're looking at private data, right? Some of them are hidden behind a paywall that you have to pay for. I think that's a question, or that's something that everybody has to contend with. But I think your question is not more about the charge, but the quality of the data. And I get your point. So, which is why I mentioned somewhere that your data has to be verified. So depending on where you get in it, you have to make sure that it has been triangulated in one way or the other before you even go ahead to pay for it. So you have to know who worked on it, the credibility of those providing it, and all those. But it's sad that I understand your plight, but it's sad that the benchmark, if I have to borrow Lamide's words, would be that what government gives you in other climes would actually be top of the top data in terms of quality. But our attitude towards governance and even those involved in running the civil service, it's sad that they are supposed to be part of this to provide some relief. But the attitude towards work would mean that we are not documenting a lot of things properly. And those gaps would show when someone requests for them. You begin to see the gaps that you highlighted. So we are not a data country like that. And I think if you listen to Lamidi, he was talking about what it took to get just basic things from Ministry of Environment and all of that. And at the end, it didn't measure up to anything. So you have to go and pay consultant to come and still do the work. So it's a mess that we found ourselves in, and we just have to deal with. So it's something that we can continue to work on. Like you said, his last comment was telling Madame that she can contribute to the credibility of what is outside if she's accurately documenting some of her experiences. Be used by another person. So what that means is that we also working with data that we have a responsibility to keep it as clean, as robust as possible, so that should there be a need for others to key into that data, it could be also really easy. But your plight is what everybody is dealing with. It is really, really difficult to get some things. My state, for instance, has anytime they are doing medium-term expenditure framework or the annual budget and they want to capture key economic macro indicators, they use the national data, so they don't tell us the GDP of Akwa Ibom. It is the GDP that Nigeria has that they use, but they have a Ministry of Bureau of Statistics. So it's just crazy how these things work, but we have to work in that context.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eddie. Credibility is key in this space that we work in. So before we close, I would like to recognize the presence of Dr. Erisa Danladi. She is the Nigeria coordinator of Resource Justice Network, the home of Publish What You Pay. So I'd like her to give us a remark before we close the session. Thank you. Can you unmute yourself, ma'am? Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so I guess she's having technical difficulty. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining this section. Please, Mr. Edidiong, please, I would like you to give us a final word before we come to a close. Thank you. If you're speaking, please unmute yourself, Mr. Edidiong. Okay, I guess we're having technical difficulties. Please, can you signify with emojis if you can still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much, sir, for the confirmation. Please, we posted the link to the attendance in the chat. Please do well to fill that out so we can share the presentation and also the recording with you right after this capacity building webinar series. And this is just the second session of the 4 capacity building webinar series that we planned on energy transition. So we'll definitely send you updates regarding the upcoming session as well. So on behalf of Budget Foundation, thank you, Edidiong. Would like to sincerely appreciate you for your time, your analysis, and your commitment for this rigorous session. We do appreciate you. And thank you so much, everyone, and especially those that have contributed. Thank you for your time. We do appreciate you. And please do well to reach out to us via email. You can reach me on alice@budget.org if you have any questions or comments or additional comments for the facilitator. So please do well to reach out to us. So thank you very much, everyone, again, and please do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.